Unholy Alliance. A Tale of the Assassin Without a Name by Scott Marlowe. I swear I'd never seen the like, I said, leaning back in my chair as I swirled the deep red of my '64 Scarlet Tempest in my glass. Here I am, willing to pay twice the market value for the man's goods, and he sputters out that he'll give me the lot for only a quarter. He was so nervous about the Traders Guild finding out about his duty evasion that I might have talked him down even further, if I knew I wasn't already getting such a grand deal. I flashed the gentlemen and ladies assembled at the dinner table a coy smile. Of course, he had no idea the fellow who'd visited him earlier that day was one of my own men, and not a real guild inspector at all. He was in as much danger of having his holdings raided as I am of, falling off a building. Dainty feminine laughter from the ladies intermingled with the hearty nods and approving bellows of their accompanying gentlemen. In business as in life, I said, taking a small taste of my wine, one must stay ahead of the competition if one hopes to reap the best rewards. Isn't that right? Indeed, Mr. Phelps, indeed, Lord Evan said, his jowls quivering as he pontificated from the other side of the table. You are indeed a shrewd businessman. Shrewd indeed. He raised his glass in salute, a gesture I happily obliged. Tell me again, Mr. Phelps, how long do you plan on remaining in Alcester? You've a keen mind for trade, and I dare say my steward might learn a thing or two about how to close a deal from you. Please, my lord, call me Marshal. I plan to stay in your fair city for some time, so please have your steward contact mine at his earliest convenience. I delight in the prospect of sharing any knowledge I can that may improve his chances of success. Perhaps we might even consider a joint venture in the near future. Indeed, indeed, the lord said, his outburst setting his jowls a-quiver all the more. Small talk ensued, with the ladies going on about some latest happening in one of their social circles, while the men gravitated toward talk of politics and the like. I pretended to listen, interjecting or nodding as needed while soaking up the Gilded Flute's smoky, candle-lit atmosphere. As was my usual modus operandi, I'd arrived at the luxurious tavern under false pretenses, assuming the fabricated identity of the very storied and very wealthy guild trader, Marshal Phelps, who'd arrived in Alcester a week ago, and who planned to remain for as long as I found the identity useful. While the persona of Mr. Phelps was false, my intentions for coming here this evening were not. No work this evening. I was here to do nothing more than relax and perhaps establish a relationship or two with some of our city's more influential lordlings and such. Who knew when such a relationship might come in handy, either in the assassination business or elsewhere? Outside, the weather had turned nasty, with whipping rain pelting the window behind me and lightning occasionally flaring in the distance. But inside, the ambiance was warm, the clientele pompous and rich, and my true identity completely unknown. Some months had passed since I'd experienced the Gilded Flute's warm embrace or enjoyed its extensive list of fine vintages. Not since shortly after I'd crossed the Black Guard. But the inconvenience of that black mark was lifted now, making me a free man, able to come and go wherever I liked, without fear of harassment. In some small way, I feel I'd reclaimed the anonymity so crucial to my life's occupation, and I found myself with a new perspective and almost a hint of optimism. Thunk! Something smacked into the window behind me. A few threw curious glances that way, but the storm raged on, so no one gave it a second thought. Perhaps a stray bit of trash or a loose branch had become unsettled. Those were my thoughts as I returned my focus to whatever Lord Evan was going on about. Ma! I winced. There was no ignoring or forgetting that sound. Still, I straightened in my chair, focusing on my wine while hoping I'd misheard the distinctive call. "Oh, look," said a woman at our table, pointing. "A bird! I wonder if the poor creature has hurt himself." All eyes went to the window, so I could scarce do anything other than turn in my chair and join them. I cringed when my gaze fell on Mathilda's crow. The idiotic bird perched outside on the ledge, its wings lifted and half spread out, as if it somehow meant to dry them out despite the downpour. With head cocked, it peered through the window with one beady, copper-flecked eye. I sank into my chair, as if that did any good. The crow belonged to a witch, and since he'd come to this specific ledge at this specific time, it meant he knew I was here. The howling wind and the pounding rain were no match for that cry. A few at the table blanched. "What a hideous noise," Lord Evan said. "Maybe it's dying?" someone asked. I hoped that was the case. But no, not dying, as I watched it slowly open and close its beak, that same copper-flecked eye looking directly at me. "Tilda!" One woman put a hand to her mouth. The gentleman next to her raised a hand and said, "Waiter! I do say, waiter, send someone outside to put that poor bird out of its misery. Its crying is upsetting my wife." I let out a breath and, realizing the futility of it all, pushed my chair back and stood. "Hold off, sir. Ladies, gentlemen, Lord Evan," I said, bowing my head slightly. "Allow me to see to it. I have some experience in this area, so it should only take a moment. If only it were that simple." I knew I wasn't returning to the dinner table this evening, but the hour was too young to make a believable excuse about retiring. The next time I ran into Lord Evan, I'd have an excuse ready, but for now I retrieved my coat from the valet and, pulling the collar close, stepped outside. Outside the main entrance, an awning shielded me from the rain, but not for long as, with a sigh, I stepped into the downpour to make my way to the window where Mathilda's crow roosted. My head, shoes, and trouser legs were quickly soaked, and of course the crow was no longer there. As a chill ran up and down my spine and water leaked down my back, I spied my table-mates through the window, enjoying the tavern's comfort and warmth, their attention already moved on to whatever trifling amusement occurred next to their tiny minds. Their laughter as I passed the window was barely audible above the crashing rain and howling wind. Walking further down the lane, I spied an alley suitably dark for Mathilda's purpose. Inside the dark enclosure, I shouted, "Show yourself, witch, and no tricks this time." My answer was, you swooping from the darkness for my face. All too aware of the crow's antics, I had a knife ready, and would gladly have skewered him if he hadn't pulled up at the last minute. From somewhere above, he emitted a horrendous squawk and chortled, as if laughing at me, before I watched him fly off into the darkness. "Hello, Thomas," a voice behind me said. I spun around, my knife still in hand, though I knew it would do little good if Mathilda meant me harm. "Where did you come from?" I shouted over the crashing rain. There had been no one behind me a second ago. I shook my head. Never mind about that. I asked the more important question. "What do you want?" "It isn't what I want," she said, gesturing behind me. Like me, she was soaked through, her plum-colored hair plastered to her head. "It's what he wants." I spun around for the second time and again came face to face with a person where none had been a moment ago. Maybe I'd had too many glasses of wine this evening because I didn't believe what I saw. Yet there was no mistaking the tattooed countenance and bull neck of the Jakaree enforcer and second-in-command, Ao-utet. "Greetings, assassin," he said, grinning. Water ran in rivulets down his bare skin, and his arms rested easy at his sides. He held no visible weapons, though I spied a studded mace and twin crysknives at his belt. I'd seen him use both weapons with devastating consequences for his victims. Because of my assumed persona, I was light on weaponry, something I hoped the fanatical priest didn't notice. I backed away from both of them. If this is an ambush, you're doing a poor job of it. I felt very inadequate holding only my small knife. "Not an ambush," Mathilda said. Thunder rumbled, shaking the surrounding buildings. "We've come to talk." "That right?" I shook rainwater from my face. "So, talk." Ao-utet hadn't stopped smiling, which I think he kept doing because he knew it was unnerving. "After we parted," Mathilda said, "I continued my search for the warder primus." This again. "And?" I had to raise my voice over the shrieking wind. "Did you find him?" "No." The conversation was going slower than expected, so I asked, "Is there someplace drier we can continue this discussion?" Mathilda humphed. Then she waved, and, without ceremony, the rain stopped. Not everywhere, since it continued outside our immediate vicinity, but within our little space, The howling wind and the pelting rain had relented entirely. Thunder rumbled but remained in the ominous distance. "My search led me to the Jakaree," Mathilda said. "You reappeared, flying into our midst with a squawk and a flurry of wings to land on his mistress's shoulder." Taking no notice of him, Mathilda went on. "The warders are a common enemy, so I thought to share information and form an alliance." I wanted to ask her what information. This was the first time I'd seen Mathilda since our adventure in the cemetery when we'd encountered the dark entity, and since that time, I'd come up with more than a few questions about it. I had hoped to ask them of Mathilda the next time we met, but not with a Jakaree priest standing right there. I didn't know if she'd shared her knowledge of the entity with Ao-utet, and since I sure as hell didn't want to mention it if he didn't know anything about it, I kept my questions to myself for now. "An alliance with a group of fanatics?" I asked, not caring that one of those fanatics stood right there with us. "Let me know how that turns out." "You can find out for yourself by accompanying us," Mathilda said. Now, why would I ever do that? In some ways, the Jakaree had caused me more trouble and inconveniences than the blackguard. But where the guard had only wanted to spoil my day, the Jakaree wanted to spoil it for everyone in the city. Mathilda gestured at Ao-utet. "Tell him." Still grinning, Ao-utet said, "The warders conduct many excavations outside the city walls. I will take you to one of them. You will see something of interest there." "Can't you just tell me what it is?" I asked. "Seems it would save us a lot of time and effort." Ao-utet slowly shook his head. "You must see this with your own eyes. You would never believe me otherwise." I trusted Ao-utet about as much as I trusted a skiva with a round of cheese, so he was probably right. "Have you seen whatever it is he's talking about?" I asked Mathilda. She shook her head. "But the death priest says I must see it too. That is why I am here." "And what about taking my head off?" I asked, returning my attention to Ao-utet. "You seemed pretty intent on doing that the last time we saw each other." That time, only his high priest's intervention had stopped Ao-utet and a score of his minions from attacking me and Liz for trespassing. The numbers had not been on our side, so as much as I hated to admit it, the Jakaree leader's intervention had probably saved our lives. Onias must really have your leash good and tight. It's never wise to poke a troll or a zealot, but I needed to know how far I could go with Ao-utet. My comment at least wiped the grin from the priest's face, and it satisfied me to see that despite clenching fists at his side, he made no move toward me. "That time will come, assassin. You can be sure of that. But not tonight. Now, I only wish to help your cause, for in doing so, I will deal a blow to the warders, which is of far greater importance presently. Rest assured, though, our time will come soon enough. Can't wait." "It's settled then," Mathilda said. "Not yet," I said. "I need more details, like where are we going and when?" "Now, of course," Mathilda said. Of course, I thought. Never mind that the storm showed no signs of abating any time soon. "And where exactly are we going? You mentioned an excavation site outside the city." "The warders discovered a temple of ancient origin," Ao-utet said. "You know the Palisade Hills? What I wish you to see is beneath them. We of the holy darkness remain ever vigilant against our enemies, so one of my priests entered the place unbeknownst to the warders and saw much. Your friends will also find this information useful since it aligns with their findings." "How do you know that?" I asked. The grin returned. Ever vigilant. When it seemed he'd nothing else to say, Mathilda asked, "Are you satisfied?" "Not really," I said. "But I'll go with you. Are we expecting to run into any warders when we get there?" "Some," Ao-utet said. "But it is late, and since our enemy lacks the dedication of the Jakaree, their numbers will be few. Worry not, assassin." His hands went to the crysknives at his belt. "I have more than enough steel for the two of us." So he had noticed my lack of weapons and still hadn't taken advantage of the situation. I didn't dare trust him, but at least his intentions for luring me outside the city seemed genuine. Mathilda shooed you from her shoulder, who flew off into the dark. Then she waved, and once more the rain and wind pelted us as we left the alley and headed from the Manchester borough across town to the shambles. I wondered why the shambles, but the unpleasant conditions were not conducive to conversation, so I gripped my coat tighter and followed in sullen silence. My question was answered soon enough anyway, as we came up against the city's outermost wall. Mathilda led us to a spot where the wall had a jaunty angle, allowing the purchase of hands and feet more easily than climbing a sheer wall. I could have handled the latter without issue, but I recognized that not everyone was as deft as me. Mathilda went first, slowly, with Ao-utet right behind her. I followed, and soon we were at the top, lying low in case a wall walker spotted us before descending the other side to the wet ground. Then, with Ao-utet in the lead, it was on into the countryside, traipsing through wet, shadowed dells and darker hollows until our guide held up a clenched fist and lowered himself into a crouch. I gave up trying to stay dry or clean as my boots sank into the shallow mud. We rounded a small hillock, and there was the dig site, with piles of dirt, wheelbarrows, and shovels scattered about, and a single cart, all juxtaposed around a dark smudge of an opening in the earth barely visible through the sheets of rain coming down. Thunder rumbled overhead as Ao-utet cautiously approached the site. No guards challenged us, and once we'd drawn near, I spotted a faint light shining from within the opening. Ao-utet signaled that he would proceed alone, so me and Mathilda hunkered down behind the cart and waited for his signal. I kept an eye on the opening, watching him disappear through it and re-emerge a short time later to wave a hand in our direction. Once we'd joined him, we found ourselves in a narrow cleft that angled slightly down into the earth. The light I saw from outside was ahead, and as we emerged into a small chamber, so was a dead warder lying on the floor, a flickering torch set in the wall, illuminating a fresh cut across his throat and a widening puddle of blood. Ao-utet raised a finger to his lips to make sure we stayed quiet. Then he padded across the empty room to a passage at the other side. Once I'd shaken most of the water from my jacket, I pilfered a small sword from the warder's corpse and, paired with my knife, I followed close behind Ao-utet with both weapons drawn. Though the initial entry had hard-scored walls, the hallway was smooth-cut, with sharp right angles and mortared joints. Whatever this structure was, it was man-made and by the musty smell and algae-covered walls, old and abandoned long ago. Fresh timber buttressed the walls and ceiling, the supports running the passageway length, and muddy boot tracks covered the floor going in both directions. Since first entering, we hadn't descended any deeper, so I realized as we skulked down the torchlit passage we were not so much underground as simply inside the hill. The structure, Ao-utet had called it a temple, must have been part of an earlier city that existed before Alcester, lost to time and memory, and covered by eons of dust, dirt, and vegetation blowing in and growing all around and over it. In my experience, things lost to time were best left alone, so as the eerie silence of the place settled over us like a suffocating blanket, I hoped whatever the priest wanted to show me was close, and that we'd soon make our way back outside. But flickering torchlight soon revealed a stair leading deeper into the earth, which did not bode well because where there was one stair, others were bound to lead even deeper. I'd heard stories about abandoned places like this. Even with the crevice newly discovered, there were always other, alternate ways inside, sometimes accessible from deep below, where some dark dweller may have chanced upon the place and, finding it empty, spacious, and homey, decided to turn it into its lair. I'd take the worst of the storm over encountering any such creature any day of the week. The stair led out into the most prominent chamber yet. The warders, who but for the lone guard remained suspiciously absent, had placed braziers at each corner of the space, and while the light from each shone low, the lighting was still adequate to look upon the statue at the room's center. At least 15 feet tall and carved from marble, a grand knight in full armor with kite shield held ready and sword raised high greeted us. 3 other passages connected with the room, making it a sort of junction or central hub to other parts of the temple. I spied a closed door down one, but saw nothing but darkness down the other 2. Like before, miners had erected wooden supports throughout. Dirty boot tracks went every which way, giving no clue which direction was more important than another. Ao-utet returned to the stair to grab 2 torches, one of which he gave to me. Then he gestured for us to follow him down the dark passage opposite the closed door. The route was longer than the first one we'd traversed, and while there were no stairs, we still descended due to the floor's downward slope. When it leveled off, we stepped into the largest chamber yet. The room was a great rectangle with pillars at the opposite side and more darkness past those. Ao-utet held his torch high, circling the area to reveal a mosaic so rich and elaborate that it must be the reason for our visit. I followed in the priest's wake, scanning the pictures as his light revealed them. The images and colors were many. So many I wasn't sure what to examine first. I wondered if the zealot might provide guidance, but he seemed engrossed in perusing them himself, leaving me on my own. Mathilda, too, who inspected every image, though she had no light of her own. I finally settled on one particular display depicting a row of armored men on horse. Knights, I supposed, leaving a grand castle. If the pictures told a story, then this seemed a beginning, so I followed the troop's trek across plains and high into snow-covered mountains to a deep blue lake. Magic ensued, based on the painted lights, I guessed, so that one knight left the lake with a magic sword. It seemed a tired tale, and I wished to skip all the in-between nonsense and get right to the end, so I walked across the room, assuming that would bring me closer to the finish. Instead, it detailed another beginning, this time of robed men leaving a dark wood. Like the knights, they also embarked on a journey, but theirs took them deep into the earth. When they emerged, one of their number carried a great twisted horn. Disappointed I wasn't nearing the end of this tale either, I skipped ahead, finding where the two journeying troops met. Perhaps met was not the right word, I realized, as I took in the scene of a momentous battle between good and evil. On one side were the knights, the one with the sword front and center. On the other, I stopped to take a breath, looking twice to make sure I saw what I thought I saw. I'd never seen an actual dragon. No one had. They didn't exist. Not anymore, anyway. But there was no mistaking the great leathery wings, claws as thick as a man, teeth even larger, and dark serpentine body curling around the dark priests who fought alongside it. "Is this what you wanted me to see?" I asked Ao-utet. Mathilda came over, standing next to me as she examined the mural. "It is the dragon from my vision," she whispered. "Decimation," I said, also whispering, though I intended to speak louder. I glanced at Ao-utet. "Why are you showing us this?" I pointed at the priests. "Are these your ancestors?" Ao-utet laughed. "No, look closer if you do not believe me." I did, scrutinizing the figures. Dark countenances, grim expressions, baleful eyes, but not a single one had tattoos on heads or faces. No tattoos. "Besides that," Ao-utet said, "the Jakaree are not an ancient order. This temple predates the fall of the old gods. What you look upon is one of the last battles between the gods of light and darkness. The knights and priests were vassals of the gods. The dragon was a god itself." Dark priests, knights in shining armor, a magic sword, and a dragon god? It seemed the stuff of legends or fables. Yet, if this didn't actually happen, why would someone go through the trouble of creating such an elaborate depiction? "Whose temple is this?" I asked. No one knew for sure, but Mathilda ventured a guess. The god of knights or chivalry, if such a being existed. It seemed a good guess. So, this temple was dedicated to an order of knights of old, and this mural depicts their final battle with a dark priesthood of unknown identity. But how does the dragon fit into it? And what does any of it have to do with our current situation? Ao-utet folded his arms and said nothing. Mathilda, who hadn't stopped examining the pictures in more detail, waved us over. "Look at the symbol on the knight's surcoats. A crossed circle, with runes in each partition. This one symbolizes hearth or home. That one, strength of arms. The third and fourth, I am uncertain. But taken as a whole, the symbol means defend or protect." "Or ward?" I asked. Mathilda pursed her lips and nodded. "The knights were warders?" I asked, not expecting anyone to answer. Or, more likely, I thought, The warders descended from the Order of Knights. The Order of the Warders? That certainly didn't flow from the tongue. Since no one else was talking, I said, "We know or think they're trying to summon a dragon, right? Decimation and all that. So, why are they depicted here fighting one?" Ao-utet had wandered off, stepping between the pillars to shine his light beyond. Perhaps the answer is here. Past the pillars was another chamber, the same size and rectangular shape as the other. Also, like the other room, its walls depicted a mural that stretched from one wall to another. Unlike the other room, though, this one had a single sarcophagus at its center. Someone had pushed the stone lid aside. Peering inside, I saw a dusty skeleton adorned in magnificent armor, but nothing else. Turning my attention to the walls, we remained silent while studying the pictures. The first showed the outcome of the final battle we'd observed in the other room. Dead priests were scattered across the battlefield. The knight wielding the magic sword stood over the dragon, whose serpentine body slithered no more due to a great gaping hole in its chest. In one hand, the knight held his magic sword, but in the other, something that shone with a brilliant radiance all its own. The dragon's heart? It seemed so. "But why would they want that?" I asked, more to myself than to the others. "The heart contains powerful magic," Mathilda said next to me. "A dragon's heart, even more so." "You wanted us to see all this," I said to Ao-utet, who leaned against a pillar with arms crossed. "Why?" "As I said, you are the enemy of my enemy, so helping you helps the Jakaree. Now you see what the warders are really after. They seek the heart of the dragon. So, not a dragon at all, just the heart of one." I had to admit that one made as much sense as the other, but perhaps Atticus or Liz could make something of it. The next time I saw them, I'd fill them in. It might even be worth having them visit the temple to see it for themselves. Still, even with my lack of understanding, the question of why the warders wanted the heart in the first place puzzled me. Other murals that might answer that question beckoned, but as I went to examine the next one in the sequence, movement beyond the pillars distracted me. "Knife!" I yelled, pointing over Ao-utet's shoulder. The priest heeded my warning without question, barely holding a knife meant to slice his neck open at bay by grabbing the wielder's arm. Veins bulged amongst the geometric shapes tattooed across Ao-utet's skull as he fought against his attacker. At the same time, a rush of warders streamed between the pillars and into the room with such fervor, I quickly worried less about Ao-utet and more about myself. Ducking beneath the swing of a mace, I rolled forward, avoided the thrust of a small sword, and blocked the attack of a third warder as I came back up. I slashed at him, but his studded leather jerkin turned my borrowed sword, which wasn't nearly sharp enough. Spinning around, all three rushed me at once with such an uncoordinated effort that counter-striking while they got in each other's way was the easiest thing I'd done so far tonight. I slashed the thigh of one, then nicked another in the chin. The warder cried out, his hand moving to staunch the flow of blood, which was all the opening I needed as I jammed my knife under his chin and into his skull. No time to withdraw the blade, I let it go, backing away with my short sword flashing to hold the other two at bay. A quick glance sideways revealed Mathilda, who had some skill with a blade, clashing swords with two others. Behind me, Ao-utet still grunted with exertion against his one adversary. Then I had my hands full again, fending off attacks from the pair of warders and another three who entered the chamber with thoughts of evening the odds. There was no telling how many more warders were inside the temple, though I remembered the closed door and cursed myself for not seeing what was behind it when I had the chance. No use in worrying about the past, my sister used to say. So I focused on the present, sidestepping a thrust and jamming my sword into a warder when he foolishly got too close. Damn armor stopped my blade again, but trying to avoid the thrust resulted in the warder losing his balance, and he stumbled past me. I cracked another across the jaw with my fist, kicked the next in the gut, and was about to slash a third when a single warder ran into the room and shouted, "Retreat!" Everyone stopped. "Retreat!" The warder kept yelling, followed by, "Back outside! Back outside! Outside now!" As one, the warders fled the way they'd come despite having the advantage of numbers. The urgency in their flight troubled me. especially since the fight wasn't going that badly for them. I exchanged a look with Mathilda, who seemed similarly concerned. Meanwhile, Ao-utet still struggled with his opponent, who I saw was as bull-necked and muscled as the priest. Yet while their contest remained evenly matched, the burly warder finally shoved Ao-utet away and ran after the others. "Now, what do you suppose that was all about?" I asked. "They fear the Jakaree," Ao-utet said, laughing. "Look at how they run." Ignoring the priest's boast, I cautiously passed between the pillars to find the chamber beyond already vacated. I had a bad feeling about this. Running, I caught up with Ao-utet's counterpart in the statue room, but I only saw his back, and then he was gone, vanishing up the stairs toward the temple's lone exit. I took the steps 3 at a time, vaulting into the entry space, and abruptly stopped. The one who'd given the order to retreat stood in the doorway with a wide grin on his face. He had one hand raised. In his grip, he held tight to an alchemical explosive, the kind used in mining, with the fuse already burned down to almost nothing. He laughed and tossed the device at me. Briefly, I considered catching it and throwing it right back at him, but I didn't think I had enough time, so, not bothering with steps this time, I leaped down the stairwell. It was a good jump, and I bet I would have landed fine if not for the thundering crack of energy slamming into me as the explosive detonated. I felt a brief sensation of flying, then everything went dark. I woke up an indeterminate amount of time later, groggy and disoriented, but alive and, as I tested my limbs, all in one piece it seemed. A faintly lit torch burned alarmingly close to my face. Rising to my knees, I nursed the torch's glowing ember back to life, then stood on wobbly legs. I spied Ao-utet at the edge of my growing light, dazed but showing signs of movement as the priest returned to the land of the living. There was no sign of Mathilda. At the center of the room, the statue of the knight still stood. I turned toward the stairs and groaned. The ceiling had collapsed, blocking the only exit. "We're trapped," I said, probably too loud because of the ringing in my ears. "Good thing I have already found a way out," Mathilda said as she strode into the chamber. The torch she carried illuminated plum-colored hair, looking more disheveled than usual, but otherwise she appeared no worse for wear. "What?" I pointed to my ear and shook my head. "I said, good thing I have already found a way out," Mathilda said, louder this time. "How did you even know we were trapped?" I asked, shaking the last lingering fog from my mind. The ringing persisted. In the corner, Ao-utet was blinking hard and struggling to rise. "I did not fall unconscious like you both did," she said. "I realized our situation right away, so I began looking for another way out. I have found one." I inspected the blocked exit in case there was any chance of moving aside some of the rubble to clear a path. I moved a few small pieces, but many more chunks were far too big and heavy and all jammed together besides. Not much chance of getting out that way, I concluded. Meanwhile, Ao-utet regained his feet. "The warders took their best shot, and still I stand." The priest let out a cackle of a laugh, but he stumbled and almost fell. A hand went to his head, and the laughter died in his throat. While he groaned in discomfort, I retrieved my borrowed sword and went to the door, which was open now. It seemed unlikely any more warders remained, so I walked through the doorway without hesitation. Inside was a short passage with other open doors leading into small private rooms where the warders had set up cots for sleeping. Blankets and pillows were scattered across the beds, and I found a chest full of dirty laundry, but not much else. By the time I returned to the statue chamber, Ao-utet had recovered, and the ringing in my ears was diminishing. "So much for warder lack of devotion," I said loud enough for Ao-utet to hear. He glared at me but said nothing. "Next time we check behind closed doors, eh?" It was a careless mistake I'd not make again, but what's done is done, as they say, and now the most pressing matter was how to get out of here. "Mathilda says she discovered a way out," I said for Ao-utet's benefit since he still looked half dead when the witch had first entered the room. Gesturing at Mathilda, I said, "Care to show us?" One passage leading from the main statue area remained unexplored. She took us down that one now, mumbling along the way. "No light, No sound, no hope, no way. Trapped in the dungeon day by day. "What's that you say, witch?" Ao-utet asked. "It's nothing," I answered for her. "Just something she does." We stepped into a chapel of sorts with neatly arranged benches facing a dais, whose centermost attraction was an altar that rested askew. I saw why as we approached. Someone, the warders I supposed, unless it had been like this when they'd found it, had pushed the altar back to reveal a narrow staircase beneath. I sighed. More stairs leading down into the depths of the earth. "This is your way out?" I asked, wondering about dark dwellers again. "Do you even know where it goes?" "It goes down," she said. Ao-utet grunted. "Does it matter where it goes? We cannot go anywhere else, unless you wish to stay here." He shouldered past me, and hefting his torch in one hand and his mace in the other, descended. Mathilda followed right behind him. Not having much choice, I shook my head and joined them. The same tracks as before covered the dusty stairs which spiraled down and down, finally letting out into a narrow passage that ended in a small chamber. I noticed two things right away about the room. One, an open chest sat on top of a pedestal at the center, and two, the wall opposite us had a hole blasted in it. The chest was black lacquered wood with strange symbols carved into its surface. More of the strange markings were inside, but that was all. Whatever had been inside of it was gone now. "Magic runes," Mathilda said, examining the chest. "But their power is spent." "Could this have contained the heart?" I asked. Mathilda shrugged. "I've no idea." "If it did," Ao-utet said, "then why blast a hole in the wall? Did they find the heart yet still seek something else? Or was the chest empty so they made the hole to continue their search? How did they even know to make a hole here?" Mathilda huffed. "You ask too many questions." But they were all good ones. "The only thing we know for certain," I said, "is that the warders were done with this temple. Otherwise, why blow up the one and only way in or out?" "There is another way out," Mathilda hissed. I hoped so, but I stayed quiet as I inspected the room. Like above, timber supports reinforced the walls and ceiling. Workers had stacked picks and shovels in one corner, along with burlap sacks filled with rocks and dirt. I held my torch inside the hole, seeing a long tunnel whose length extended beyond the reach of my light. Taking point, I carefully made my way through the passageway. The warders had strung lanterns along one side, so I turned each one up as I passed. Some had more fuel than others, but combined with our torches, the way was soon well lit. As we picked our way forward, I speculated about what the warders might have been looking for down here other than the heart. But since I had little idea, I exhausted that line of thinking before I reached the end of the passage. The tunnel was rough, the telltale grooves and pockmark signs of picks, shovels, and even burn marks from alchemical explosives all along the walls, floor, and ceiling. Though I'm no expert, I imagined the explosives must have been small, and targeted ones at that, to create such a narrow, specific corridor, which deviated little in direction while angling down. The air here was cool, and I felt a breeze on my face. "I see light," I whispered behind me. The illumination ahead was green and flickering, as if moonlight danced across the rippling surface of a lake, and the walls more jagged, almost like the warder excavators knew they were close and, in their excitement, did the least amount of work possible to make the way passable. That implied they knew they were close to something. But how? How did they know anything was down here? What was down here, for that matter? As I exited the tunnel, I supposed I was about to find out. The flickering green luminosity originated from some sort of algae spread across the rough ceiling and walls of a great cavernous chamber. An irregular smattering of jagged rock made up the floor, but I spotted smooth pockets here and there. No, not pockets, I realized, but bits and parts of a walkway running from one side of the area to another. Debris choked much of the lane, but it was all passable, so I started walking down it. Soon I saw smooth blocks of stone arranged in squares and rectangles, recognizing them as the remnants of building foundations. The path meandered, cutting through more of the ruins. Here I saw the remains of a wall, and there, the remnants of a stone staircase leading nowhere. Mathilda and Ao-utet were as wide-eyed as I must appear at what the warders had discovered. In Alcester, taverns abounded with minstrels telling tall tales of lost underground cities and such, but I never put much stock in them or thought I'd ever walk the streets of one. That such a place was so close astounded me, yet I had never imagined it existed down here. Amazement aside, I still wondered what the warders hoped to find here. As fortune would have it, I spotted a warder ahead, sitting with his back to a half-collapsed wall, but I soon realized he was dead, his throat cut if the blotch of blood was any indication, so there were no answers here. But while that wound had killed him, it was only one of many etched across his body. Deep scratches marked his face and arms, strips were torn from his trousers, and bloody lines raked his torso. Someone had really wanted this warder dead. Curious, I crouched low to get a better look at him. I'd seen corpses aplenty and created my fair share of them, and while the scratches didn't faze me, the wound at his neck did. I reached out, tilting his head to get a better look at what I realized wasn't the cut of a knife but a great gaping hole, as if someone, or something more likely, had torn his throat out. "That's a bad wound," Ao-utet said. "Animal?" Not knowing for sure, I shook my head. What kind of animal capable of doing that lives down here? "The kind that kills warders," the priest said, shrugging. No longer interested, he moved on. Mathilda made a face at the sight of all the blood, but she followed him. I noticed she'd become more watchful, though, scanning not only the way ahead but also above and behind. Wondering what she thought to see, I followed her example, probing every shadow. I saw nothing, but that didn't mean I stopped looking. Something was out there, and I didn't think it was interested only in killing warders. The lane widened, and structures on either side were more intact, as if whatever calamity had befallen the city had spared this part of it. The buildings rose tall here, all the way to the pulsating, algae-covered ceiling, and prickled weeds and fingers of shrubs stabbing their way through the cobbles pockmarked the street. We poked our heads into some buildings in passing, but other than broken crockery, the occasional piece of discarded furniture, and empty shelves covered in dust, we saw nothing of interest. "So," I said, thinking through the situation, "the warders found out about this city and how to access it, came down here. Then, what? I've heard stories of places like this, but damn if I've any idea about this one or what the warders were doing wandering its streets." Mathilda sniffed. "This must be Khoras," she said. "Stories speak of an underground metropolis that existed long before Alcester. The stories say creatures of darkness who crawled from the underland's deepest parts, enslaved Khoras's people, and destroyed the city during the Second War of the Gods. The Three Great Wars, they were called, each a conflict inspired by the immortals that inevitably spilled over to their followers. The first and second were indistinguishable in my mind. A conflict started, many people died, and then they ended. But the third war was when the gods went too far, their battle reaching such a disastrous climax that they destroyed one another. Good riddance, most people say, since it seemed the old gods, as they're known nowadays, brought nothing but trouble with them. Some, like Father Kem or the Jakaree, lamented their loss and tried to carry on as if they might someday return, but there seemed little chance of that. Beyond Shantywall, there's a place called the Blasted Land, where the last conflict between the immortals occurred. Wild magic, which some believe is the gods' remaining essence, rules that place. I've never been there, nor am I an expert in the field, so I couldn't say. "Perhaps not destroyed," Ao-utet said, "but lost all the same. Sometimes there is little difference." It was the most thoughtful thing I'd ever heard the priest say. "If we wish to know what the warders were looking for in Khoras," he went on, "then we need only follow the trail of bodies." He lifted his mace, pointing down the shadowed street where, sure enough, I spotted another corpse. This one lay face down, but he was as dead as the first, with a brutal slash that had split his neck and shoulder and killed him instantly. Blood had flowed from the wound onto the cobbles, but it was dry now, the man likely dead for some days, though the cool, stale air had preserved his corpse eerily well. The next body was not so close, but there was another and still another after that one. We kept following the trail, seeing 3 more warder corpses, each showing signs of brutal violence. The first one's arm was nearly severed, with multiple deep gouges across his chest and abdomen. The same severe cuts and slashes marked the other 2. Finally, the trail seemed at an end as we entered a square where 2 things were immediately clear. The first was that this was another warder excavation site. The second, that a battle had brought their mining activity to a violent and abrupt end. A statue of a knight similar to the one in the temple, but larger, drew the eye immediately. Once it must have stood proudly with sword raised, greeting all who entered the courtyard. Perhaps it symbolized strength or protection, reassuring the citizens of this dead city that they had nothing to fear. Now, it no longer stood at all, since the warders had ripped it from its dais and toppled it onto its side. The arm holding the sword had broken off, and the knight lay face down. Next to the statue, another corpse lay in a similar position. Also, like the statue, the man had lost his arm, though where it had gone I couldn't tell. Where the statue had stood was a great gaping hole. The warders had constructed an elaborate hoisting mechanism marked by metal supports, gears, chains, and winches over it. I followed the length of cables stretching down from the hoist into the dark earth, but the lines quickly disappeared into the void. More warder corpses littered the square, but the wounds on these were different. No slash marks or cuts, but pulverizing injuries that had crushed skulls and limbs, spattering blood and guts in radial patterns around the dead bodies. Walking around, I saw dirty wheel and boot tracks leading from the plaza's center down another street to some other location in the subterranean city. Ao-utet looked on in stoic silence, his gaze narrowing as he tried to understand what had happened here. Mathilda, who wandered about as I did, bent to pick up a broken pick. She glanced at it briefly, then tossed it into a cart whose wheels had been torn off and smashed. The broken handle clattered inside, the sound echoing from the empty storefronts lining the square's exterior. Crates, once stacked neatly, were overturned and smashed like everything else. Their contents, tools, goggles, mining helmets and clothes and foodstuffs, strewn across the cobbles. Though no one said anything, I had a feeling we were all thinking the same thing. Plenty of warder corpses, some slashed, some crushed, but no sign of whoever, or whatever, had attacked and killed them. I wondered if any of the warders had escaped or if they'd all died here. Whatever the answer, it seemed the warders had been surprised, leaving tools, supplies, and even their dead behind. "We should keep moving," I said. There was little more to see here and nothing else to learn. Mathilda nodded, and Ao-utet, who probed the shadows beyond the square, grunted his agreement. We'd barely taken a step when we heard the jingle of the mining lift's chain and saw the slightest movement of the links. That small movement became something more, though, as one half of the chain slid up around one winch, while the other half slid down. The lift was rising. "I see movement in the shadows," Ao-utet said, hefting his mace. I saw it too. Dark forms twisted against a darker backdrop, with no way to tell for sure what we saw, even with the green luminosity illuminating the square. "Mathilda," I said, "think you can magic us up some light without blowing us all to hell?" She huffed and rolled her eyes. "I don't know, but I'll try." She grabbed a handful of something from a belt pouch, then blew into her hand, scattering a cloud of scintillating, illuminated dust that expanded and rose above our heads until it spread across the entire square and beyond. The light revealed, in no uncertain terms, that we were completely surrounded by a writhing, twisting mass of claws, fur, long teeth, and tails swishing back and forth. Most haunting of all were the hundreds of milky white, unblinking eyes staring back at us. "What devils are these?" Ao-utet growled. The answer seemed obvious, though I'd never seen so many at one time. "Skiva." "Rat folk, yes," Mathilda said, "but a kind that has not seen the light of day for generations. Sightless ones, they are called. The city must be their home. The warders, with their digging, must have disturbed them and brought them here from all corners." Mathilda's hands lit up with fire. They will kill us rather than let us leave, just as they did to the warders. I wanted to remind them that I'd been enjoying a peaceful night before they'd come and ruined my evening. But there was no time as the writhing mass of Skiva hastened toward us. We positioned ourselves back to back, forming a triangle to cover our flanks. Then the rat men were on us in a maniacal wave that almost instantly disrupted our formation. Only Mathilda, hands shooting clouds of flame, did anything to hold them back. For me and Ao-utet, it was close-quarter combat with the press of bodies offering an unlimited selection of targets. Stark white eyes, clouded over and sightless, mattered not at all as they swiped at us with claws and opened maws resplendent with rodent teeth. I stabbed one through the throat, slashed another across the face, then nearly took another's hand off when it reached for me. But the constant replenishment of their ranks meant that even as those first ones died, more climbed over them instantly. Next to me, I heard Ao-utet grunting with effort, his mace cracking skulls and snouts, while behind me, Mathilda shrieked, her flame so hot I felt it on my back. Then, as quickly as it had started, the Skiva turned and ran. Rat corpses littered the surrounding space, some smoking and lit by tiny fires, while the lifeblood of others seeped onto the square's cobbles. At the same time the Skiva fled, the rattling of the lift halted and the mining cage rose into view. Peering over my shoulder, I saw the cage swaying in place as the hoist creaked from the weight of whatever was inside. Slowly the door groaned open and out stepped a hulking brute straight out of a nightmare. Perhaps stepped wasn't the right word. The creature had entered the cage and not bothered to turn around, or maybe it couldn't, given its sheer size. So as it emerged, it did so with its back to us, unfolding itself from a hunched position to stand at least 10 feet tall. Spiked hair, iron armor, and muscles rippling across gray arms and legs stood out the most, but so did what it carried. In one meaty hand, it balanced a long-handled mop. In the other, a great bucket sloshing with sudsy water. The creature inhaled a massive breath and sighed. "You made the mess," it muttered in a gravelly voice. "So you gotta clean it up," says the boss. "So here I am to clean it up." The creature spun around, sloshing water everywhere. The moment it spotted us, it almost dropped the mop and bucket in surprise. Crimson eyes under a thick brow narrowed, and it spoke in a deep baritone, the words choked out between pointed teeth and fangs. "Hey, you ain't supposed to be here." The mop clattered to the floor, and as the creature dropped the bucket and reached for a spiked mace hanging from its belt, more soapy water sloshed out. Next to the creature's enormous weapon, Ao-utet's looked like a child's toy. "Looks like I'm going to make more mess first." The creature raised its spiked mace and took one thunderous step toward us. Next to me, Ao-utet dropped into a fighting stance. I considered other options, like sneaking around to attack the creature from behind or, even better, leaving. Before I did either, Mathilda extinguished the flames lighting her hands and, stepping forward, met the creature head-on. She was stick-thin and tiny compared to the hulking brute, but she stopped before him with hands on hips and shouted, "Who do you serve, Gaugath?" Gaugath, a goblin, though more akin to giant kind. The Gaugath stopped, glaring at the witch, but resting its mace on a shoulder where it could still squash Mathilda like a bug in one quick motion if it so chose. "I serve Lord Rax," the Gaugath grumbled, puffing out its chest. "And what is your name?" Mathilda asked. The creature spun the mace on its shoulder. "Grook, though most call me Bone Crusher." How original, I thought. Mathilda waved a hand across the square. "Is this your handiwork, Bone Crusher?" "Some of it. Skiva had their turn, too. Can't keep that vermin away no matter what you do." Grook shrugged his massive shoulders. The motion clanked his mace against his pauldron. "You killed them because they trespassed?" Mathilda asked. "That's right." Grook sniffed. "You some kind of witch or something?" "Something like that," Mathilda said. "Since we also trespass, will you kill us too?" "All outsiders who trespass in Khoras must die, so says Lord Rax." "Do you always do what Lord Rax says? Surely someone as powerful as yourself does not listen to his every word." Grook chuckled. "Nice try. Witch or whatever you are, rules are rules." He lifted his mace with all its pointy spikes, looking like he was about to smack it into his open palm, when he realized that might be a bad idea, so twirled it instead. And I gotta follow him, just like everyone else. Just our luck that we run into the only honest goblin on this side of Shantywall. I approached the goblin. How about you answer a couple of questions before you kill us? Gruck flicked his chin in my direction and asked Mathilda, "Who's that?" "He does not have a name," Mathilda said. "No name?" Gruck's gaze narrowed. "Don't trust someone with no name." "I have a name," I said. "It's—" I thought a moment, then smiled. "Skull Splitter." Gruck stared at me long and hard. "Don't look like no Skull Splitter." He pointed his mace at Ao-utet. "He looks more like a Skull Splitter to me." I wasn't going to argue that point. "Thomas, then, if you must know." Gruck chuckled. "That sounds more like it." I wasn't sure what the Galgath found so amusing about the name, but before I said something I regretted, I reminded myself that anyone who called himself Gruck was in no position to toss around insults about another person's name. "So," I said, "now that we know each other, feel like answering some questions?" Gruck considered it. Then he said, "No." "No, what?" "No, I don't feel like answering any questions. Fact is, I'm hungry. Boss sent me here to clean up this mess, so after I'm done with you three, I'll get back to it before it gets any later so I can get home for supper." He hefted his mace over his head. Mathilda took a step back. "Wait," I said, scrambling for the discarded foodstuffs I'd spied earlier. "I found one that smelled like jerky and tossed it at him. Maybe that will still the rumbling in your belly." He sniffed the jerky in its paper wrapping and, finding it to his liking, tossed the entire thing, paper and all, into his mouth. He chewed all of 3 times before swallowing. "Pretty good. Any more down there?" "Plenty," I said. "After you answer our questions. What were the men you killed doing at the bottom of that shaft?" Again, Gruck chuckled. "You're not as clever as you think." He waved his mace at the rations spilled across the floor. "After I kill you 3, I can take as much as I want." "And you're not as dumb as you look," I mumbled. "What's that?" Gruck asked, pointed ears perking. "You calling me dumb?" I was about to protest, saying I'd called him no such thing, when Mathilda interrupted. "Enough! I tire of your banter. Now, Gruck, we have questions you will answer." Gruck stamped a booted foot on the ground like a petulant child. "No, I won't." Mathilda huffed. "My time you waste, so now you are stuck in place." "Hey, what did you do to me?" Gruck tried to lift his legs, but neither budged. "Let me go!" The Galgath twisted and turned. He heaved and strained, but no matter what he did, his feet remained securely in place. He even tried grabbing his thighs and yanking on his legs, but even his considerable strength yielded no results. He was stuck, and that was that. Having been in a similar position once, I sympathized. Mathilda crossed her arms. "I will release you after you answer our questions." Gruck snarled, reaching out with his mace, but no one stood close enough for him to hit. Mathilda waited for the Galgath to finish thrashing about. When it finally seemed he was done, she said, "Tell us what happened to these men. How did you know they were here?" Gruck glared at us, but he realized there was only one way out of his predicament. So he said, "They disturbed the vermin with all their clanking and clattering. Then they came down in their cage, looking for something." "What were they looking for?" Mathilda asked. "Did they find it?" "They found nothing," Gruck chuckled. "But we found them. Lord Rax figured they were looking for gold or jewels. He was mad as hell that no one had noticed them sooner, so he had them all killed on the spot. Then he sent me and some others up here to kill the rest." He shrugged. "Vermin had already gotten most of them." Mathilda shook her head. "You know very little, Gruck, and I've half a mind to leave you stuck forever. However, answer one more question, and I will free you." Gruck grumbled, but he lent a pointed ear. "How do we leave Khoras?" "You don't. No one does. Lord Rack says anyone who enters never leaves, except in a box. Less who know about this place, the better, he says." "Are you lying to me, Gruck? Mathilda asked, her voice low and dangerous. No, I ain't lying, he said, but not convincingly. The truth and I will set you free, Mathilda said, but continue to waste my time, and you will suffer for it. That didn't rhyme this time, but still steam rose from Grook's armor, and sweat soon glistened across his forehead. Hey, Grook said, tugging at the collar of his iron breastplate, is it getting hot in here? You feel the heat because of your deceit, Mathilda said. Now, how do we return to the surface? And do not think of lying to me again. I know your people sometimes come into the city in the dead of night. You think no one knows, but I do. Grook continued fidgeting with his armor even as more steam rose from it. He wiped the sweat from his considerable brow, then stuck his tongue out and exhaled. Mathilda, I said, if you cook him, he won't be able to tell us anything. But she shushed me and, with arms crossed, stared up at the giant goblin and waited for him to relent. Her face was stone, while Grook's was marked by an open mouth with tongue protruding and widening eyes as his fingers worried at the straps of his armor. All the while, sweat beading on his forehead ran down cheeks that flushed a ruddy color, making his gray skin turn duller and darker. Finally, he'd had enough. All right, Grook shouted. I'll tell you. Then do so, Mathilda said. Do so now. He pointed down a street. That way, down 6 blocks, then left, up the stairs, and through the building. There's a hole in the back. It leads into a tunnel going up. Grook kept fumbling at his breastplate straps. Now, it's really getting hot. Let me go. Before Mathilda released her spell, I asked, what about that way? I pointed down the lane where I'd seen wagon tracks leading deeper into the city. Did those people make it out? Grook shook his head, finally removing his armor. The humongous chunk of metal clanged to the floor. He wiped his brow. It's still hot. Mathilda crossed her arms, raising a brow at him. Grook knew what he needed to do to save himself, so he blurted out, We ambushed and killed them all. They were digging, like the others, so we plugged the hole they made. Plugged it up real good, so no one can ever use it again. Now let me go, witch. I answered your questions, so let me go. Mathilda humphed, and just like that, Grook was released from her magic. He breathed a huge sigh of relief and slumped over his knees. Ao-utet chose that exact moment to spring forward and bring his mace down hard on the back of the Galgath's head. Grook growled from the impact, and his head rose to stare at the priest through blurred vision, so Ao-utet hit him again. This time Grook slumped to the ground. Was that necessary? Mathilda hissed at the priest. Ao-utet sneered back at her. We of the holy darkness are ever ready to do what is needed, even when others are not. He would have been on us the second you released him. Now he is no longer a threat. No one argued that last point. Grook was out cold, and though blood oozed from the Galgath's skull, I couldn't tell if he was dead. Ao-utet couldn't tell either, so he drew his crysknife. But before he leaned over and did his dirty work, we heard chittering and saw the writhing forms of the sightless ones creeping from the darkness once more. The exitway remained open, but only for now. I suggest we get out of here before we're surrounded again, I said. Ao-utet hesitated, torn between finishing the job and getting away. But he sheathed his knife and left the square with Mathilda close on his heels. Sweet dreams, I said to Grook, wondering if the Skiva might try to eat the Galgath before he woke. I shrugged, then I left the square as well. Grook's instructions were flawless. The way out took us up and up, becoming fairly steep at one point, and ended at a solid iron door large enough to accommodate someone of the Galgath's stature and girth. The door was barred and heavy enough that it took all of my and Ao-utet's strength to swing it open. Beyond was a cold basement lit only by our torches and a staircase leading up. While we manhandled the door closed, Mathilda ascended the stairs and disappeared from view. We followed, finding an empty house, dark, dingy, and smelling of mold. There was no sign of Mathilda, either inside the house or outside on the street. I immediately saw we were deep in the shambles, on some deserted lane where no one bothered lighting street lamps. I guess the witch had enough of us, I said. Ao-utet grunted. As I with her. I have fulfilled my end of our bargain. You have seen what you needed to see. Now, what will you do with that knowledge? For now, sleep on it. Then we'll see. The warders are no friends of mine, but neither are you. Ao-utet grinned. Then our alliance is at an end. When next we meet, it shall be as it is meant to be, with us locked in combat and fighting to the death. To the death it is, I said, hoping it was his death we were talking about and not mine. Until next time, assassin. Ao-utet stalked off into the darkness, and that was that. I went the other way, wondering if Mathilda, who lurked in the shadows nearby, meant to join me. She did, slipping neatly beside me like we were old friends. I hoped the witch didn't think a couple of jaunts about the city and below it made us friends, but maybe it at least meant we weren't enemies. Unlike Ao-utet, she didn't want me dead. Not as far as I knew, anyway. The priest means to make war in our city, she said. He is not to be trusted, but you already know this. I did, so I said nothing. That night, Mathilda said. I glanced sidelong at her, not sure what night she meant. You followed me home. Oh, that one. You wanted to kill me for saying what I said, she said. For knowing what I know. Now, why would you ever think that? We have an understanding about that, don't we? Mathilda nodded. You know about my daughter. I didn't think I needed to acknowledge that, so I stayed quiet. And I know about your sister, she said. I stopped, wondering where she was going with this. The agreement was simple. She stays quiet about Olivia, and I don't kill her. I hoped she wasn't having second thoughts. Mathilda crossed her arms. Just so we understand one another, I know you value your family above all else. I do as well. There is nothing I would not do for my daughter. She is my blood and all I have. What about you? She shrugged. He is of less importance. Hopefully the crow wasn't close by, listening in. Family's important, I said. So let's do each other a favor and stay away from each other's. In fact, outside of the warders and Jakaree, let's agree to stay out of each other's business altogether. Agreed. We resumed walking. So, I said, the mystery of the dragon is not so mysterious anymore. Pity we cannot easily revisit the place to study the paintings in more detail, Mathilda said. Not without going through Khoras again, I said. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, what do you know about sheaf parchments? Nothing. I shrugged. Thought I'd ask. About Khoras. How long do you figure goblins like Grook have been coming into Alchester? But Mathilda chose that moment to veer away from me, so my question remained unanswered. Good night, Thomas, she said, and then darkness enveloped her. I heard her soft footfalls on the wet cobbles, but growing fainter and fainter until even that sound faded, and then all traces of her were gone. For the first time since leaving the underground, I noticed it had stopped raining. Water pooled across the poorly maintained road, so I had no choice but to slosh through puddles. Jamming my hands into my jacket pockets, I walked into the night and made my own disappearance. You've reached the end of this adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel to get a notification when each new story is available. You can view all my books and get the latest news by visiting scottmarlowe.com.